Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I am Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am very excited for today's conversation with Mark Knight, Senior Managing Consultant at 1898 & Co. Before we get to Mark, we just want to thank our Platinum Organizational member, Onuma System, as well as our patron members, Definitive Logic, now a Mantech Company, CGI, ABS Quality Evaluations, and Jacobs. As well as all our organizational members, especially 1898 & Co., for their continued support of this and other programs, especially upcoming event next Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. We are having an event at the National Academy's Keck Center around optimizing real property investments at federal agencies, as well as decision-making strategies from federal executives and GAO reports. And Mike Bordonaro, ALN Executive Director, I believe, is going to come on to say a little more. But I will just note that the faces you see here are Mike Imony on the left next to National Academies, Amelia Shachoy in the GAO, and Shakoy, and Daniel Platts from the United Nations. Really excited to hear more from these three on January 10th, and I hope we will see some of you there. And now Mike will say a little more.
Yeah, special shout out to Amelia, who got this whole ball rolling for an event that focuses on reports from the national academies and, very importantly, the Government Accountability Office. And so after some welcomes and the keynote by Daniel Platts, the GAO will speak about their reports, and Amelia will be facilitating that. And then Mike Imony and Jack Dempsey, who were critical in the report from the National Academy's Strategies to Renew Federal Facilities, will be speaking. And then we have an array of federal executives who are sharing best practices. And then we have a summary panel of people who will be giving an overview of what they observed and what that means for federal asset management and what the ALN can do to support federal asset management activities going on into 2024. And before we bring on Mark, I do want to say that this is starting out to be just a spectacular year. In addition to the events next week, Daniel Platts has agreed to stick around, and we have gotten excellent response from legislators in my district, Nick's districts in Virginia, legislators who want to meet with Daniel and hear how the United Nations asset management initiatives align with U.S. interests. And we're very happy that they see that alignment and want to learn more about it, and that Daniel is willing to stick around for those types of information meetings that can hopefully lead to other things. We also have Port Storm 2 scheduled. That's the AI brainstorm, Port Storm 2, where we're using artificial intelligence, digital twins, and asset management governance to show how to improve mission outcomes. That's been going really well. We have new members joining us. We don't have Kahua specifically lined up with us yet, but they have said all systems are go. Jacob is coming back and joining us with other airport asset leadership board activities and city and places asset leadership board activities. The white paper that we wrote with CGI is being submitted to the National Property Management Association for their magazine, and it's just really an explosion of wonderful activities. And part of that explosion of activities is Mark Knight, who is an ALN Senior Fellow, will be in Washington, D.C. next week. He will be presenting at the National Academy's Transportation Research Board events that are happening all week long. The National Academy's Transportation Research Board is huge. Thousands of people show up every year for a full week of intense activities on all types of transportation issues. And guess what? They're all asset management related. So it's very fortunate that we'll be there. We'll be able to jump over. We've got Earl Jackson, who we've worked with at the Denver Transportation and Infrastructure Department in Denver. He's the CFO there. Will be meeting with us and discussing ongoing activities. It's really exciting. So, Mark, thank you for joining us. And can you give us a little background on what you've been up to? We usually say, how did you get to this point in your asset management journey? Well, we've talked with you a bit, so we kind of know about your journey, but we haven't talked to you for a while. What's been happening lately, and what does 2024 look like to you in 1898?
I think 2024 so far looks like a perfect storm of everything you've just been talking about because I guess in the fall last year, we kicked off a project with a port looking to strengthen their asset management activities. So, ports really got on my radar, I guess, during COVID, when we started seeing all these stories about, 80 or 100 ships, just offshore, the congestion in ports, and really made me think a lot about the whole supply chain. I mean, my goals had always been, with the electricity grid modernization work, to make sure that eventually when I got to a point where I could retire, I'd be confident that I could flip the switch and the lights would come on. But more and more, I'm thinking about, the whole supply chain and where things are manufactured, and just the critical role that ports play in, a vast amount of international commerce. So the ports side of things was really interesting. I've been watching TRB for a while, but you mentioned Amelia, and I was at the IM's North America conference in Toronto last year, and was sat down to have lunch with Mark DeClercq, who you know well.
Yes.
And I
And
think
hello, Mark.
Amelia,
Thank you for joining us. He's out there.
Amelia sat the other side of me, and I think the two of them had planned to have a conversation, and somebody sat next to Mark and started talking to him. So Amelia and I ended up spending the whole lunch just chatting to each other, and wonderful person, and obviously, deferred maintenance and what's going on with your session next week. It really got me thinking about that, because that's a topic that's come up a lot in talking to ports. And it made me really think about how much we all put things off. I mean, an example of things in the past, I think certainly that have, work that gets, is something easy to cut for a year from a utility perspective, is things like tree trimming, vegetation management. You can cut it out 1 year, but you leave it longer than that, and you're going to have troubles. But it's never easy to go back and ask for more budget then to kind of cut what you didn't do last year. And deferred maintenance, I don't know. I think you should have a really good session next week. I mean, I do want to talk a little bit about that, because I have this kind of mental picture of like a simple Jenga, stack. And each time you decide you're going to defer maintenance something, you have to pull a piece of wood out the bottom and put it on top. And there's only so long you can keep deferring maintenance until the whole thing comes down. And the report that Amelia clued me into, the GAO 24-105-485, I think you're going to be featuring that in your session next week.
Yes.
At the academies. But really interesting. I've scan read it. I haven't been through it in detail. But I guess the bottom line is, GAO has been looking at federal agencies, and a lot of them have been reporting a significant amount of deferred maintenance. And they came up with 12 recommendations in there. I guess we don't necessarily have to go into the recommendations themselves, but some of the things they looked at as causes, I found interesting. I mean, insufficient funding. that's I think when most of us think about deferred maintenance, that's going to be right at the top of the list. Increasing age of assets, lack of facility staff, which again, you can tie that into the funding aspect of it, I think. The scheduling of work conflicting with other mission activities, neglect and bad maintenance practices, and then management's decision to put money into something other than maintenance. And I know you and I talked recently about an example maybe that I'll bring up, which was very unfortunate. The last finding I thought was kind of interesting. It said asset is not mission critical, deliberate decision not to fund. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, because if you know a mission, an asset is not mission critical, that says you've done some level of criticality analysis. And if an asset is if there's redundancy, it's a low priority, it doesn't cause mission critical problems if it fails, then running to failure and underinvesting in things is not necessarily bad, just so long as you understand and have documented what those risks are.
Right, that's the critical part. And I think the report is, and Nick just posted the link to the report, which Amelia initiated. So thank you for initiating that, Amelia. But if you've done the criticality analysis, that assumes that people understand this asset management. And what we're finding out is that leaders are not really attuned to the subtleties that our audience are attuned to. And it's a matter of presenting the information to them in a way that allows them to make those decisions. Do we have enough critical information or not? Now, do you want to give your example of the unnamed amusement park in the unnamed country that resulted in fatality?
Yeah, but well, before I do, I mean, what you just described was a perfect issue with line of sight, right? I mean, line of sight.
And we should say that Mark was the person who won the competition to name our newsletter, and that's why our new newsletter is named Line of Sight.
So I guess we don't need to name the amusement park, but it's public information. You can Google it; you'll find it pretty much instantly. And the sad thing with this example of deferred maintenance is you can see the problems coming a mile away. So this theme park wanted to increase revenue, so they slashed the entry price to increase the number of customers, which is what they saw. After a while of having slashed entry price and increased customers, though, they noticed that revenue was up and profit was down. So there's a red flag there, in as much as you had to have been expecting that to happen and been prepared for it. So I guess they weren't. So they implemented cutbacks. The cutbacks weren't sufficient. And it got to the point where they decided to stop all maintenance and repairs and only make capital spending. And I won't go into the gruesome details of the accident, because it sounded pretty nasty. You go Google it, you'll find it. But
People
6 guests
died.
got stuck and on a ride, and 4 of them were killed. Because
the last thing
they
you
were actually
want,
tipped out of a ride into the mechanism driving the ride, which was pretty gruesome.
which is the exact opposite of the mission of an amusement park. And but the formula is clear that if you avoid maintenance, you're going to have accidents. That's just guaranteed.
So the other example, I know we talked about kind of in passing the other day, Mike. I actually did a bit more research on it. My local subway station. So what happened was a car drove into the edge of the parking garage on the roof level. and a 10,000-pound chunk of concrete detached itself. And the subway station, if you know what the Louvre is like in France, you know, the little sort of glass pyramid going down underground. Well, they've got this glass structure coming up from underground as the roof of the subway station, and this 10,000 pound chunk of concrete. I thought it had gone all the way through, but apparently most of it was caught by the steel structure, you know, with the glass in place. But some of it went through, shattered the glass, and fell down right by the ticket machines where there were people. And I think the only injury was a young girl that had her hand cut by a piece of falling glass. No fatalities at all. But I was telling Mike, I have since, well, long since ceased parking at that garage, because if you drive up there are places where you can see rebar, you can see holes through to the deck below. It was in a dreadful state of repair. But we all do make decisions to defer maintenance. It's not just federal agencies, it's not ports, it's not utilities. I think it's one of those things that everybody does. And there's an interesting diagram, I think, I found it interesting in page I think it's page 7 of that GAO report. First figure, it's kind of got like a spigot with a pipe going into a big container, and that's the backlog of deferred maintenance. And then they've got an outlet from that with 3 ways that agencies can look at the backlogs. And my mental picture was a little different, but similar, where, you know, mine was sort of people on a small rowing boat or something like that, and you've got a leak. Do you fix the leak or do you start bailing? And of course, it comes down to how fast you can bail. If you can bail faster than the leak's coming in, then you can reduce the backlog. But if you can't, all you're going to do is think you're fixing the backlog when it's actually getting bigger. So I do need to go back and look at the report in more detail, but I'm interested to see how much focus there is on actually stopping the backlog, you know, rather than actually fixing the backlog that's there, because it's kind of a cause and analysis, you know, type thing.
And that requires an asset management governance mindset, culture to approach that and decide as a leadership team which way to go, because sometimes bailing and patching at the same time is what's required. And there's never enough resources. So it's always a matter of managing what you have to the best outcomes, predictable outcomes. And you can't have predictable outcomes if you don't have an understanding of what your assets are, what your measurements of their value are, and their measurements of their usage, so you can make hard decisions is what it comes down to, and having the right information and visualizing it. And the GAO has done a great job of helping with visualizations. The 19-57 asset management framework that Amelia helped establish is an excellent way of people getting the mind around the issues. So what do you?
Yeah, and I see Amelia's point in the chat about, you know, the important point is to effectively prioritize investments in, you know, given limited resources, and that's really the crux of the matter, right? I mean, we all face limited resources. It's understanding what you can let fail, and where you have to invest. And if you still can't find the resources, then you have to make a case for getting more resources.
And that's excellent little pitch for next week. Nick, can you put up a link to the registration for the event next week, which will be online and in person? So if you're in Washington, D.C., please come and join us. But if you're not in D.C., you can follow along online, surely not all day long, but, you know, whenever you can pop in, and then recordings will be available. But that's what we know the Air Force has done, is very well establish what their resources are, what their needs are, and then match them using artificial intelligence, all types of advanced technology to help them with those decisions. That's what the Bureau of Reclamation did. They established an asset management plan, got it funded because it was understood. These people know their assets, therefore, let's work with them. There are many examples of people getting money because they know how to present their cases. What will you be talking about at the Transportation Research Board meeting?
By the way, I've seen some presentations from the Bureau of Reclamation on their asset management activities. It's it's very thorough. So I'm going to be at the Ports and Channels committee. I'm really just going to give a brief overview of asset management in ports. So one of the things that we've been doing with the work we're doing currently is talking to a number of ports around the country. Well, I guess technically around the world, but all but one so far have been in the US. And we're really looking at, just asking some pretty standard questions to see what the state of asset management is, the types of things that people are doing, So, there's some common findings, I guess, that we've seen so far. And I actually dug out American Association of Ports presentation by one of my colleagues from 11 years ago that's pretty much got the exact same list of things on it. And I think he was ahead of his time in kind of evangelizing the role of asset management for ports. I think, today more and more ports are getting a lot more interested. I've seen some fairly sophisticated analysis that some ports are doing, and others are a lot further behind the curve, so to speak. So I think as an industry, they are certainly seeing the need for asset management. So I'm just going to talk, at a pretty high level about that, and maybe some areas of research that we could be looking at in the future.
Please include links to the ALN AI Brainstorm Port Storm, and let them know that we're going to be doing Port Storm 2 in March. We haven't set a date yet, but we have interest from the American Society of Civil Engineers to participate in that also. So let's get a good group together for this next port storm.
All right, I've written that down. I'll probably mention what's going on at the same time over, a couple of miles away in DC where you are, and talk a little bit about your deferred maintenance session, just because, that is something that ports face as well.
Yeah, one of the meetings we're having the next day is with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which deals with all the ports. They're actually having a leadership meeting, and Daniel Platts and the ALN will be meeting with our colleague Peter Dogian to inform him on what was said at our event and how alignment with the United Nations asset management initiatives can help U.S. interests.
And the U.S. Army Corps gave a presentation at the TC 251 meeting in Philadelphia back in May of last year, where they talked about the work they were doing, and they actually had a presentation on the work they did in putting their strategic asset management plan together. So if you're interested in what the Corps' SAMP looks like, it's actually out there on the website. You just go Google it, you'll find it pretty easily.
So we also want to thank you, Mark, for being an ALN Senior Fellow. You were the lead in establishing our paper with the IAM on asset management leadership. That was very well received.
I know you and I have another couple of pet projects that we're trying to find time to go work on as well, in terms of more papers. It's just trying to find the time to work.
Actually, that's a good thing to mention for 2024. And an approach that the Asset Leadership Network is looking to take sensitively is how many disasters there are because of improper asset management, culture, thinking, understanding. And we have been trying to enhance and rapidly deploy best practices, share success stories. Well, now we're thinking that a focus on failures might be necessary to really gain widespread attention on why asset management matters. And we've got to be sensitive about that, but we think that'll be a way of getting attention to the
And I call that one of the lines from that paper we worked on, which actually came from Tom Smith. Tom Smith had reviewed an
University of
early copy.
Wisconsin, Madison, yes.
Yes, and he had in his email back to me with his comments, he had a line about, in his opinion, in a mature organization, the line between asset management and organizational management disappears. And it immediately hit reply as like, I'm stealing that line to put in the paper. And I think that's just, it's great, because at that point, asset management has become something that's been embraced culturally. And at that point, it really is about making portfolio-based decisions and everybody coordinating, breaking down silos.
Well, that's one of the things, boy, we can just keep on talking about what we're looking forward to in 2024. Jim Dieter really wants to emphasize the value statements of the new ISO 55000 document, and the value statements that were not included, because there will be statements that aren't accepted in ISO, but the ALN still thinks they're important. And so we'll be advocating for those value statements also. So when do you get to DC?
Get there Tuesday afternoon, head back Wednesday afternoon. Going to be a whirlwind, fitting in as much as I can.
Well, we're very happy to be having dinner with you. Nick, do you want to say anything about the response you're getting from your legislators?
Yeah, just how exciting it is that there's some interest and that we're going to be in DC and in a place with a UN representative to do some education and advocacy, because it seems time and time again that the principles of asset management are not so much rocket science. They make sense, and it's just it often takes leaders seeing how that applies to them, being educated a little bit, and then shown a little how that their line of sight includes all of that stuff. So just really excited to get a chance to bring that to some Wyoming senators and Congress people, and see how we can apply these time-tested methods for optimizing our nation's assets.
Yeah, I was happy for the quick response from the legislators also. There's some competition between the United Nations and the US, and US is arrogant. Sorry, I'm just going to be honest about it. If it's not from us, then it can't be good. And that's just not the case. And so I was very glad to see that legislators were interested in the framework that the United Nations has established for governments, federal, national and local governments. And it'll be exciting to share that and get those discussions started. Well, Mark, it's a pleasure talking with you. Look forward to finally meeting you in person after all these years.
Yeah, it seems like we've known each other forever, but we never actually met face to face. It's going to be fun.
Yes. So thank you everyone for joining us. And actually next week at 3 p.m., we have a meeting with Mike Quigley staff. So he's a representative from Illinois. So I won't be part of it, but we'll work out something. We'll get Nick set up with somebody to talk to, and there'll be a special live from DC program next week. And look forward to seeing you then and bringing you some exciting news that occurs in the next 7 days. Thanks, and bye, everyone.